All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and get the program rolling. My name's Matt Holland. I'm the program and volunteer coordinator at the Buffalo History Museum. We have a really special presentation from Karl Kindt today about Louisiana Purchase Exposition. Before that, I'm going to go over a few just details of how we do these webinars. We're recording it right now, so if you're having any sort of technical difficulty, you know of anybody who couldn't make it, or you know of somebody who didn't register at all and wants to see it, we will post a video of this later on. So just so you know, that'll be available to everybody. And that's available also, as well as we do these webinars through the support of our membership. So we'd like to thank our membership. And if any of you are interested in joining the Buffalo History Museum, I'll be posting a little link here in the chat that if you feel like becoming a member or looking into it, you can do so. But the other thing is we'll do a Q&A at the end. I'll try to keep track of questions along the way. So if you do feel like sending us a question, something comes to mind really quick, I'll try to keep track of them, and then we'll go through them at the end. So, so without further ado, I'll hand everything over to Karl.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Matt. It's quite an honor to come back to Buffalo, New York area. I grew up there, and I'm virtually back there. Let's put it that way. I had planned to do this presentation back in April for the History Museum and was going to drive out that way from St. Louis, Missouri, where I'm speaking from right now. But let's get into this presentation. The Louisiana Purchase Exposition, otherwise and more popularly known as the 1904 World's Fair, Meet Me in St. Louis, Louie. So that's where the song comes from, but it was set up to celebrate the purchase from France by the United States of the Louisiana territories. Napoleon decided he could make some money for his war effort by selling it to us, and so we purchased it through Thomas Jefferson's agency. And then there were states that were carved out of that purchase. And so all these particular states that were carved out of the purchase had special monuments. You'll see those as we go along. Here is my name and my phone number and my email. And you see there is a website that's I set up here with all kinds of information about the fair, and a lot of these photographs appear there as well. If you have questions, you can give those to Matt during the presentation, and I will have time at the end to answer those. But if you think of some questions afterwards, and you can either call me at that number or email me, and I'll be happy to answer those for you as well. I'm a member of the 1904 World's Fair Society here in St. Louis. I teach about the World's Fair at Webster University. And so I got very fascinated by this fair when we moved here to St. Louis about 40 years ago, because I knew about the Pan American and wanted to know more about this fair. So World's Fairs compared to the 1904 fair. Dubai is going to be the site, hopefully, in 2021 of the next World's Fair. And there's a link showing up there. You can go to their website. They were going to have it in 2020, but the pandemic kind of put a damper on that. And so even though there are World's Fairs in our age, they're not very well attended compared to the 1904 World's Fair, which is still the largest World's Fair in human history in terms of attendance and in terms of acreage. The size of this fair in Dubai will be about 1,000 acres, but it's still short of the acreage that was used for the 1904 World's Fair, which was over 1,200 acres. And also in terms of the number of buildings, Dubai is not going to come near the 1,500 buildings that were at the World's Fair in St. Louis in 1904. The Buffalo World's Fair, Pan American, in 1901, covered about 350 acres. So, in a day and age when there was no air travel, few automobiles, or highways for them to travel on, even so, 19 million plus attended the St. Louis World's Fair. Um, and the interest in World's Fair back then was you could travel um, by train to St. Louis, and people came from all over the country. And then there were 50 nations also represented that came by steamboats, of course, and then by train to St. Louis. But the interest in the fairs was much greater back then because in order to see other cultures and other societies, and to see the kind of technology that they would be bringing in the art and so on, you'd have to travel. Well, most people couldn't, afford to do it. There were no airplanes, and steamship travel was very expensive. So they were very much more popular back years ago. And I'm going to speak about the incredible influence on human history that these fairs had in terms of technology and its development. We're going to see some of that. And also some of the influences on society itself. The fairs reflected the prejudices and often the racism of the period of history in which they took place. As you will see from some of the photographs I'm going to be showing you, one especially of African Americans and Bill Key. However, Bill Key was an African American, a former slave from Tennessee, and he was the first African American to be allowed to have his own building on the fairgrounds and an exhibit. We'll see that as we go along. So there were some breakthroughs at the World's Fairs, and the president of the World's Fair in St. Louis, President Francis, wanted to make this a non-racist fair. Of course, he was fighting against a big racist society back then, and he did the best he could. The world's first woman news photographer came to Buffalo. Her name, Jessie Tarbux Beals. We're going to see up front some of her photographs that she took. The images of the fair are from 8 by 10 glass plate negatives. 400 of those I had the honor of digitizing at the Missouri History Archive Library. And these are incredibly zoomable images because an 8 by 10 glass plate negative has got incredible detail, over a gigabyte of detail in each one of these glass plate negatives. So you're going to see some really good detail as we go along. Over on the right, you see the statue of King Louie the Ninth, exhibited at the 1904 fair, and it's still here in Forest Park on the fairgrounds where the fair took place. He was the saint after whom St. Louis was named. So here's a little quick comparison of the two fairs. The Pan American Exposition held in Buffalo was designed, the purpose of it was to unite in the bonds of peace, knowledge, friendship, and noble emulation of all the dwellers on the continents and islands of the New World, in quotes. And then it was held from May 1st through November the 2nd, 1901. It occupied 350 acres there in Delaware Park. 8 million attended the fair. Thomas Edison's company illuminated it and filmed the expo. The 1904 fair was designed to celebrate the centennial of the purchase of the Louisiana territories. The fair took place, however, April 30th to December 1st of 1904. Notice a year too late to celebrate the 100th. And that's because it wasn't quite ready. It was a very ambitious building project. 1,200 acres and the present day grounds of Forest Park and Washington University, the largest World's Fair in history. The exhibits were staged by approximately 50 foreign nations, the United States government, and 43 of the then 45 US states. Edison also filmed and illuminated the St. Louis World's Fair, and over 19 million, to be exact, 19,694,855 persons came to the fair and were in attendance. Now, I want to say a little bit about Edison electrifying the fairs. He did not electrify the 1893 fair in Chicago. Tesla did that one. Tesla and Edison were competing about AC/DC, Edison was in favor of DC. It was less dangerous, but it didn't travel very far. And Tesla, who's memorialized in Niagara Falls, there's a big statue of him there. He pushed AC because you could transmit it so far, though it was much more dangerous. And so obviously Tesla won out. So this is the 350-acre area covered by the World's Fair in Buffalo. Now I'm going to show you a few images of the World's Fair in the Pan American in Buffalo. Lit up here at night. It's a nighttime view. And here's one of the large avenues that traversed through the fair. You can see the pillars and the electrical tower that's in the background there. And illuminated again by the Edison Company at night. Beautiful, beautiful fair it was. And gondolas were brought, as they were to St. Louis, from Venice. And the gondoliers were also Viennese gondoliers. You could take a ride around on the canals that were built there in the Delaware Park. Once again, the light up of the fair with the fountains being lit. Beautiful, beautiful scene in the Buffalo Exposition. And there it is in the daytime. Now, unfortunately, of course, the Buffalo Fair Pan American is noticed for where President McKinley was shot on September 6th of 1901. And this is inside the music hall, a picture taken before the crowds were brought in and McKinley stood there shaking hands. And then he was assassinated September 6, 1901. This did actually curtail the number of people that came to the fairgrounds, and there were all kinds of problems that took place after it. This was the last portrait taken of President McKinley before he was assassinated the day before, in September 5th, 1901. Now we're going over to St. Louis, and this is April 30th of 1903, the dedication day for the Louisiana Purchase. It wasn't ready yet, but they wanted to dedicate it in the year that was supposed to have happened. And here you see former President Grover Cleveland on the far left, President then Teddy Roosevelt, and David R. Francis, who's on the far right. Now, if this picture had been taken without the assassination of McKinley, he would be standing where Teddy Roosevelt is in the photograph. But Teddy came to the fairgrounds with lots of military protection. However, someone did try to kill Roosevelt 8 years later in 1912, on October 14th. And what is remarkable about Teddy here is he had a 50-page speech in the pocket of his coat, and the bullet hit that pocket, and it did drive itself through the paper, but didn't kill him. It did get into his body, and Roosevelt took his coat off and showed that he had been hit. But then he said, well, the bullet is in me now so that I cannot make a very long speech, but I will try my best. He was the Bull Moose president. So now it's 1904, and we are going to go into this fair and see all of the amazing technology and culture that was on display, as well as some of the, well, I call it the good, the bad, and the ugly of a World's Fair. And I say lost and found because the images on the glass negatives of the World's Fair, only a handful of them really were printed back in 1904. And then all of the glass negatives, 8x10s, were stored in a library in the basement in St. Louis and forgotten about for decades and decades and decades. And then they were found, and some of them had water damage, as you'll see as we go along. But I call it lost and found. And as I say, 400 of those that I digitized were amongst the lost ones, and you're going to be seeing some of those. So here is the 1904 World's Fair lit up at night. And there was a great lagoon in front of this building called Festival Hall. Festival Hall would seat thousands of people. I think it was about 5,000 people could be seated in this gigantic building. And it contained the world's largest organ. You're going to hear more about that as we go along. And that organ is still the world's largest organ. No organ has ever been created that's bigger than this organ. And where is it now? It's not in St. Louis. It was shipped to Philadelphia after the 1904 fair. And the store that is there now, the Macy's company, has it in their store, and you can go and listen to it play as it played in 1904. So this is a panorama view of the fair, of the 1,500 buildings, connected by 75 miles of roads and walkways. And if you gave a hurried glance to everything, not less than a week. The Palace of Agriculture alone covered 20 acres. And the photo below was taken from a wireless telegraph tower. Actually, there were 4 photographs taken. What I did is take the 4 photographs and I concatenated them together into a panorama view of the fair. So the photographer took 4 separate pictures and I put them together in this panorama. So we're going to zoom in on this plate over here on the right, and you can see what is called the model city. This was the main entrance to the fair, and you would come in and you'd go to the model city to see what a real modern city should look like. A drugstore, the playgrounds, the hospital, and so on, and the city hall. So you could explore that. And also, over here was that statue of King Louie. It was at the main entrance of the fair. It was moved later, after the fair was over, to the top of Art Hill in front of the Art Museum. But that's where it was back then. So what we just did is we panned across the whole fairgrounds from the north to the south. So as we look at this, just to get you oriented, we are not now looking toward the south of the fairgrounds. Notice down below the tents. Jefferson Guard, an Army group, was brought to the fairgrounds to protect dignitaries like our presidents and vice presidents and all the rest. And also they policed all of the 1,500 buildings. So they were the police officers of the fair, and they slept right there on the fairgrounds. Now we're going to zoom back the other way. And the arrow pointing upwards, Art Museum, that's the only building standing, that building that's way back there behind Festival Hall. And all the other buildings were torn down and made, as you'll see, plaster of Paris, called staff. And then over on the far right is the Ferris Wheel. Ferris Wheel was brought down from Chicago. Mr. Ferris invented it, and it's the world's largest Ferris wheel. It was brought to St. Louis for our fair here too. And the arrow pointing to Washington University is where the Olympics were held. The first Olympics in the United States were held on at the gymnasium and on the track at the Washington University. And on the far right, you see University City, a nearby city, and people would stay there in a tent city and then walk over to the fairgrounds. The Women's Magazine building, it's kind of hard to see there, but it is now the City Hall of University City. And again, this is just to get you oriented where north, west, east, and south are located. Now, every person that came to the World's Fair was asked to sign a guest book at their state building. So New York State had its own building there, and you would go and sign your name if you attended the fair. I don't have access, a digital access to those books, but I do have access to the Missouri State Building books. In fact, I digitized these, and I looked to see if any persons from Buffalo signed in at the Missouri State Building. And lo and behold, I found some signatures. Here's one of them. And you can see Buffalo, New York. This was August that they came. The name was Helen I. Stahli-Luker. I think that's it. Let me zoom in a little bit more. Helen I. Stahli-Luker from Buffalo, New York. Some of you may be related to this person. If so, give me a holler and I'll send you a photograph of this page of our registry book here. Now, this is the famous song that was sung by people coming to the fair and at the World's Fair. It was written back in 1903 by a New Yorker who was at a bar in New York City, who was planning to come to the World's Fair in St. Louis, and he heard the bartender being asked a question. And the question was, "Louie, give me a Louie," because the bartender, Louie, had invented a drink and named it after himself. And that triggered the idea in this New Yorker's mind of this song. You may not have heard all of it, though, maybe just to meet me in. Let me read part of this for you. When Louie came home to the flat, he hung up his coat and his hat. He gazed all around, but no wifey he found. So he said, "Where can Flossie be at?" A note on the table he spied. He read it just once, then he cried. It ran, "Louie, dear, it's too slow for me here, so I think I will go for a ride. Meet me in St. Louis." I won't read all that because then there's the second verse. The dresses that hung in the hall were gone. She had taken them all. She took all his rings and the rest of his things, the picture he missed from the wall. "What, moving?" the janitor said. "Your rent is paid 3 months ahead." "What good is the flat?" said poor Louie. "Read that. Meet me in St. Louis. Meet me at the fair. Don't tell me the lights are shining any place but there. We will dance the hoochie coochie. I will be your tootsie wootsie if you will meet me in St. Louis, Louie. Meet me at the fair. Later on at the end, we'll sing this together. Now, this is one of the cameras that took the pictures of the 8x10 glass plate negatives at the St. Louis World's Fair. And those cartridges you see, the negatives would put in there, they had the emulsion on them, and then they would be stuck into the back of the camera, and then the cartridge would be pulled out, and then the shutter would be triggered and expose the emulsion, the cartridge put back in, and the negative pulled back out. Here is one of the negatives. And now I will change it into a positive. Now, these men were moving one of the thousands of statues that were placed all around the fairgrounds, on top of the buildings, inside the buildings, along the walkways. And you notice they are dressed pretty rustically. They're doing their hard work, and they've got a dolly there that they pull along and push together. Now we come to Jessie Tarbux Beals, the first woman news photographer. There's a book by Alexander Allen Sr. about her, and this is a cover of that book. So in 1901, the Beals resettled in Buffalo, New York, and later that year, Beals was hired as a staff photographer by the Buffalo Inquirer and the Buffalo Courier, after impressing the editor with a photograph of ducks waddling in a row entitled "On to Albany." This position made her the first female photojournalist, and was well regarded by the papers and citizens of Buffalo. Worked at the publication until 1904, when she left to take photos of the 1904 World's Fair. She was sent to the opening of the fair, and there she persuaded the officials to give her a late press permit for the pre-exposition, and she climbed ladders and she jumped into hot air balloons to get photographs that interested her. And she was greatly interested in the indigenous peoples, which resulted in her capturing many spontaneous images that didn't fit into the predominant narrative of racial and developmental progress that the anthropologist had in mind. So you're going to see some of these pictures as we go along. But here she is with one of the cameras that she used in Buffalo. She often carried her own equipment. Sometimes she had a staff that she had working with her. But she was born in Hamilton, Ontario. Her parents were American citizens, but she was born up there. And she had on December 23rd, 1870, and she died on May 30th, 1942. She was educated at College Institute of Ontario. So here she is, a picture taken of her at the World's Fair on the left, up on one of the many ladders. She loved to take pictures from way up in the air. And over here on the right, she's in a hot air balloon, a helium balloon it would have been. And here she is up on that ladder in front of the Austrian pavilion, and she's taking pictures up there. I don't think I would, she doesn't have a seatbelt on, let's put it that way. Here she is on that balloon. And I believe it was a helium balloon that she's going up, not hot air, as I said, or she'd be burned up right now. Here she is with her camera equipment, ready to go up and take some pictures of the fairgrounds. Here's a picture she took. This is an interesting photo. She was up on a ladder looking down, and these cars came all the way from New York City to the World's Fair. Over 500 cars left from New York City to come to the World's Fair in a day when there were no superhighways, hardly any highways at all, and they left to come to the fair. Out of the 500 that left, only 75 cars actually made it to the World's Fair, and these are those automobiles on the fairgrounds. Here she again up on that ladder I showed you a little bit earlier. You'll notice she does have some people holding the ladder for her, but she did like to get those pictures from way up high. Notice how large that camera is. It's not like one of our cell phone cameras. That thing weighed probably about, with the negative in it, a good 10 pounds. Much of her focus at the fair was upon the indigenous peoples who were brought by the anthropologists from all over the world. Here she posed a child from one of the families who was brought from the Philippines by one of her cameras, and then she taught him how to take her own photograph as she took his photograph. So you can see here he's about to take her photograph by squeezing the bulb that opens the shutter. One of the most popular members of the Dublin community in Lawrence County, Georgia, she took a picture of him in the early years of this century, was African-American man known as Laughing Ben Ellington. Ben Ellington got his name from his loud laugh and humorous storytelling. Ellington toured the country performing at festivals, fairs, and at the Louisiana Purchase Exposition. He was one of the more popular entertainers because his laugh was so catching that if you were depressed, you were told, go see him and have him tell you a story. And he, of course, laughed at his own stories, and he did a remarkable job of entertaining people at the World's Fair. And he was one of the few African Americans that was allowed to do presentations at the fairgrounds. He celebrated his 100th birthday at the World's Fair. Now, here's another picture she took. The people brought from around the world were asked to demonstrate some of their skills. Archery was one of them, and here she took a picture of them. And in the house behind them was built by the materials that were brought to the World's Fair by the anthropologists, the same materials they used to build their own homes back from where they came. Bettina, in traditional dress, she lifts up her arms before Jessie to show the elaborate tattoos that are on her arms. These were to indicate family history. And you'll notice on these 8x10 glass plate negatives how I can zoom in to see the detail of the family history tattoos that she had on her arms. Filipino carpenters are here at work. They arrived in St. Louis in 1903 to begin constructing the Philippine village of the Louisiana Purchase with the materials that were brought with them. Now, I'm going to have to tell you something that was very racist at this point, one of the ugly parts of that era, and that is some of the Filipinos, the Igorot peoples that were brought to the fair, came in California, and when they were going on their trains up through the mountains to get the mountain passes, the heat was turned off to their cars, and they were not given coats or anything warm to wear or blankets. And they were just dressed in their native garb. And some of them caught pneumonia, and they died before they got to the fairgrounds. Their bodies are buried in a cemetery here in St. Louis, a cemetery in unmarked graves. Myself, being a member of the World's Fair Society in St. Louis, and my wife and others are trying to get the graves markered. We know the names of the people and honor these dead ones. My wife Margie taught school at a school that was built on the fairgrounds where this building here you see being built right now was being built. And when she found that out, she invited the descendants of the Igorot peoples to come to her school and do a cultural exchange. And they were very happy to come and described the good things that they got out of their ancestors who came to the fair. And we remorsed with them over the bad that happened as well. Several hundred Native Americans from more than 50 ethnic groups were present at the fair, and they also had their native dress, and they had their own dwellings that they built. And some of them did not want to come from the reservations, but they were forced to come. Another example of racism at the fair. Four Moro boys are shown here in one of the boats. Notice the building built on stilts that they built at the fairgrounds. The Moro village consists of 7 houses, an administration building that was also a theater, was a theater that native dances and music were presented in. They also demonstrated their diving abilities, and fairgoers would throw coins in the water and they would dive for the coins. Another unfortunate thing that happened at the fair, the Igorot culture included eating dog meat before they would go to battle in a war. They didn't like dog meat, and when the anthropologist told them that every day at the World's Fair they were going to be given a dog to slaughter and cook and eat and offer it to the fairgoers, they resisted and didn't want to do it. They didn't like the taste of dog meat, and they didn't want to do this. It was not a daily part of their culture, but they were forced to do it. And unfortunately, also, the vendors that were selling sausages on buns all through the fairgrounds got the great idea to tell fairgoers when they were offered a bun with a sausage in it that it was a hot dog. And so that's where the term hot dog comes from. She, a Navajo child, is shown in a seated position. And again, these are pictures that Jesse Tarbux Beal took. He is wearing traditional dress, barefooted, is playing with a coin purse and a Navajo belt. And most contemporaries to the Louisiana Purchase Exposition identified the men brought from the Congo Free State for the fair as pygmies, although the Africans came from a number of ethnic groups and they were not called pygmies by themselves, of course. And the unfortunate thing is this person that we see here, as we're going to find out, is Oda Benga. And he was brought and put on display not only at the World's Fair, but he was also, after the fair, he was actually captured by a slave trading tribe in the Belgian Congo and sold, and he was brought, and his family had been killed by Belgian mercenaries. And when he was brought here, he was 21 years old. And after the fair, he was taken to the Bronx Zoo and he was put in with the monkeys at the Bronx Zoo in New York City. And the enraged Black ministers and African Americans in New York City protested this. And finally, he was given his own living arrangement at the zoo. But then he was adopted by a Black seminary in Lynchburg, Virginia, who was taken to an orphanage there. And unfortunately, he did kill himself. So this is part of the bad part of these fairs with the racism that was behind it. There was a beautiful spot on the Pike called the Streets of Seville. It was a beautiful garden area, and you could walk around. You see people walking around in like costumes like this from Seville. There were gypsy dancers that posed for pictures on the Pike, and you could go and see some of these. Admission was 25 cents in 1904 money. As a part of the fair, the Olympic Games were held on the fairgrounds, and the various peoples brought from around the world were allowed to participate in a special Olympic day, but they were not given the opportunity to participate in the regular Olympic events. And so the non-white winners of these games were given American flags instead of gold medals. Another sign of the racism at the fair. Now, when people came from around the world that were not brought here, they dressed up for the fair. They didn't dress in their Levi's or dungarees. So these are people waiting to get into the World's Fair, and you can see that none of them have on shorts. They're all dressed in suit coats with hats and so on. And that was the fashion of the fair. If you wanted to come to the fair, you came that way. Now, this is a picture that was taken of that festival hall, and I'm going to zoom in on this. One of the gondolas, again, brought from Venice. And the festival hall, again, was the largest building on the fairground, seating thousands of people with that world's largest organ. And you can see the fountains and a cascade coming down in front of it. Water was pumped up that hill and then flowed down the hill in front of the festival hall. Where did you stay when you came to the fair in 1904? Well, there was a tent city in University City, and you could stay inside of a tent like this. It had wooden floors, and it was heated, no air conditioning, but they did have fans. This is a picture of that tent city that you could have stayed in when you went to the World's Fair. It was within walking distance of the World's Fair. Again, the no air conditioning, but they did have fans. Or you could have stayed inside the inn at the Inside Inn, the only hotel that was in the fairgrounds. And it had room for thousands of people. This is that statue of King Louie that was erected in Forest Park by the main entrance. It was made of plaster of Paris and horsehair mixture called staff. And after the fair, it was put into bronze. But it was just plaster of Paris back then. In front of the statue, you see the angels whispering into the ears of the spirit of St. Louis, giving direction to St. Louis into the future. That part of the statue was not cast into bronze and is lost. This is a bird cage, outside bird cage. It was built by the Smithsonian Institution in Forest Park for the fair. And this is a construction, these are construction pictures that Jesse may have taken. We're not sure about who took these, but you can see the men up on top of this gigantic bird cage. We can zoom in on them. Notice no harnesses. A number of people died during the construction of the World's Fair. There weren't the safety measures taken today. And so that was an unfortunate part of the building of these fairs as well. You can see some of the wire mesh that's going to be put on in rolls there. And that wire mesh was brought in by horse and buggy. Not many trucks were available back in those days. And the parrot, you see, I put that colored parrot in because I felt it ashamed that the people that went to the, when this was completed and saw all the birds would remark on the color of all the birds. The most colorful birds in the world were brought to the fair and put on display in this open air outside bird cage. It is still in St. Louis. It's the other structure that is still available for you to go through. The construction of the fair. The buildings were made of wood, and then the staff or plaster of Paris was put on the surface of them. Here you can see some men up there with no harnesses on the roof, and they're attaching some of the staff to the roof. Here they are hauling it up. Notice no electric motors, all muscle power and winches. Now we're going to get inside some of the palaces and see some of the displays, particularly some of the buffalo presents at the World's Fair. You may know the Shelkoff name. This was a Shelkoff leather display inside one of the palaces. You notice how ornate these inside displays were of where they would place their work, their good works. And I can zoom down and see a little bit more of that. The Shelkoff Company. And there's another view of it there. Notice the painting that's up at the top as well. And next to it is the Textile Bazaar. All kinds of textiles were on display. Now, as we go through the interior, you're going to notice that a lot of these items are for sale. So these big, gigantic buildings were like shopping malls of today. There's another one of those panorama paintings on the Shelkoff exhibit from Buffalo, Niagara Falls area. And then the Buffalo Forge Company had some really nice displays of some of their machinery. And the Arts and Crafts Shop from Buffalo, New York had all kinds of arts and crafts that you could buy and learn how to make. And now back to the Buffalo Forge Company, some of the steam pumps that were on display there as well. Imagine these being brought to St. Louis on trains, then loaded onto wagons and hauled into St. Louis and put inside these palaces. Another example of some of the Buffalo Steam Company's products. Now, fashion at the fair. If you came to the World's Fair, as I said, you came in your best. Look at these women. The one in the center is the wife of the governor of Illinois. But the look at the garments here and the hats. One thing about the hats I want to say is just one amazing discovery I made, and that is all the women and the children, the girls came with hats. Most of the men came with hats, but if you look at the men's hats, most of them are all the same. But none of the hats of the women that came to the World's Fair in 1904 are the same. I have inspected all the pictures of all the women wearing hats that I could to try to find duplicates. But as hard as I looked at all the hats, I found no identical hats. Now, how could that be? Well, back then I was told by a hat maker that you would go to a hat maker and have a hat made for you and customized. Or you could have a generic hat and then you could buy odds and ends of items to put on your own hat to make it unique. None of those hats are the same. And they're posing in front of the Washington University building that was a part of the World's Fairgrounds back in 1904. And that building, of course, is still standing as a part of Washington University. Now, how did you get around the fairgrounds? 75 miles of walking. But if you were a woman and you had a child, you didn't need a wheelchair, but they had roller chairs that you could rent. And a college student would push you around on the fairgrounds on the roller chairs. And so some of these roller chairs you can still find in antique malls. There were hundreds and hundreds of them. Now, here is a picture of the opening day, and you can see there are thousands of people gathered to hear the speech that's being made by the president of the World's Fair and other politicians. And you notice how far away the photographer was and how these people are seated. That's Festival Hall in the background. But now I've zoomed in. Do you see a microphone? Do you see a PA system? No, those were not invented yet. They were not available. And so all of the politicians and the speakers back in those days that spoke to large crowds had booming voices and could project those voices out to the crowds. Again, Festival Hall, here you can see the cascades coming down, waterfalls coming down in front of Festival Hall. You can see where it was pumped up there by electric pumps and then came down the cascades. Now, the world's largest floral clock was created in St. Louis, Missouri at this fair. You can see it there in the background. I'm going to zoom in on it a little. You can see how tiny the people are around it. That was the world's largest floral clock. And special flowers that were designed to open every so many hours were placed into the clock. And there was a big bell that chimed the hours as well. It is not in St. Louis anymore. For some reason, they decided to tear it down. Now to Statuary. Notice these men on top of the electric building pavilion, they're putting together some of the statuary up on the top of this very tall building. And as we zoom in, you can see some of it is just being pieced together and then a little more plaster of Paris will be slapped into the cracks. But the main thing to remember is these men have no harnesses on, right? They're up there with the winch And it's amazing. And also another amazing thing, we can see, because the photographer who took this was on top of a building, the detail on in these statues. But from down below, if you looked up, you hardly saw any of that detail. You could see statues up there, maybe make out what they were, but just amazing use of statuary, even when it couldn't be seen very well. Here's an enlarging project. You can see Atlas, a small version, and the sculptor is working on enlarging it to the larger piece. Now, this was a famous statue in front of the Mines and Metallurgy building. In Illinois, there was a coal mine that collapsed, and the families went to wait to see if their family members were surviving and would be able to be rescued. And in this case, this miner was rescued, and his daughter was standing by and came up and hugged him. And people took pictures of that, and also this statue was made. It's still up in Chicago now. It was taken up there, and you can go to one of the parks and see it in Chicago. Very moving statue. And the lunchbox has the name of the sculptor on it. It's J. Mulligan. Inside, there were many statues too. These are all marble statues from Italy, and I can zoom in on these a little bit. These were for sale. So you could come in and take a look at these and possibly purchase one. This one was called the moon, the full moon. It had a mirror in it. And if you look in the mirror, you can see the camera that took the picture toward the lower bottom there. So it's reflecting the mirror, the camera in the mirror. Now we come to the Varied Industries building, a gigantic structure, and it housed all kinds of new equipment, typewriters, and all kinds of things that people hadn't seen before, all kinds of technology. One of the pieces of technology that is incredible was not only inside the buildings, but outside. You can see the arrow pointing at it down below, something that people had never seen or heard before. You can make it out. If you can look at it carefully, you might see that it is a scale. It's a scale that you could stand on. And here is one of them inside of a building. I speak your weight, 5 cents. And you notice there's a YouTube video there that I have on my website. You can go to and click on it and play it. And you can actually watch one of these scales that's survived the World's Fair. And you could go there and stand on it and have your weight spoken out loud. This talking scale speaks your weight, limited to 250 pounders, though nothing over that. Notice the speaker there. So when you stood on it, there was a wax cylinder in there that Edison a company had made, and it would have a sort of a needle, and it would then give your weight out loud so everybody could hear how much you weighed. Now, I was told that this was a money loser at the World's Fair. They lost money on these machines. I wonder why. The Waterman Fountain Pen Company had this amazing display. You see that dome there? Well, that's stained glass. It was beautiful. And these giant pens actually could write. They were columns, but they could actually write. And they had some larger ones as well that you can see it hanging there. They could take off and write with it. And if you bought from them a fountain pen, you then belong to an organization called the Dip No Mores. The Dip No Mores. The Dipnomores was an organization back then in 1904 of people that were going from the dip pens to the fountain pens and promoting them. And now here's an interesting display from Holland inside one of the exhibits. And you could actually go to the Holland exhibit and you could buy ice skates. And if there were people from Buffalo, New York, I'm sure some of those bought some of these ice skates and took them back to Buffalo. And the Bailey Company from Detroit had this interesting display, and you could buy some of this statuary. This was all ceramic statuary that you could purchase from the Bailey Company of Detroit. Notice on the far left, the Russian antiques from Jacob Weintraub. So you could go over there and look at the antiques. These were gigantic buildings, bigger than any of our malls. We have any one building in our malls today, just incredible. So take a look at these. And if you go to antique malls today, you will find, and I actually found a couple of these in antique malls here in St. Louis and purchased one. Now, this is the Terracotta Company in St. Louis. Lots of the buildings in St. Louis have terracotta on the facade of them. The building I'm in right now, in my apartment building here in St. Louis, has some of the terracotta statuary and moldings that are on the front of our building. And again, you could contract with the company to have terracotta put on your buildings. There's that Atlas statue, the miniature one we saw before. You could also buy tapestries. And I'll zoom in on some of these. I wish we had color photography back then. Imagine the amazing color in these tapestries that you could purchase inside these buildings. And Switzerland had a carved exhibit inside of their building. So you could purchase this bear that's holding a little baby bear, all carved out of wood, and all kinds of other things carved out of wood here too that you could purchase. They had a grandfather clock that was carved that you could purchase here. Binder and Company, the fine wood carvings. And the Sonneberg Toy Company had this amazing presentation of their toys at the World's Fair. These are pull toys, and I've actually found one of these in an antique mall in St. Louis. And that's a life-size camel that you could purchase and have your children ride on, I guess, in their bedrooms. And all kinds of dolls, all kinds of little horses and foxes are on display here and available for purchase. Sonneberg in Germany is still a toy company there, and they have a museum with many of these same toys on display in Germany. The Palace of Manufactures was amazing because you could go to the Buster Brown Shoe Company and you could be measured for shoes, and they would actually be made for you at the World's Fair. So you can see here, Buster Brown was at the fair walking around with his dog, and you could meet them. And you could go and sit in a chair and be measured for your shoes, and then actually have them made there and come back sometime later and pick them up. And Paris had amazing gowns on sale for thousands and thousands of dollars. Notice the water damage on this particular glass plate negative, that because they were stored in a basement in a library, and people forgot about them. But these gowns, many of them were ruined because the water leaked through the roof of this building. And there were, they said, $1 million worth of French gowns were ruined by the water that leaked through the roof. And the French had a toy exhibit as well. As you can see here, you could buy riding a horse or camel, and all kinds of target shooting types of toys with rubber tipped, I hope, darts for your children. And the Bissell Sweeper Company had their state-of-the-art Bissell sweepers on display. And look at the top of that exhibit. It's a giant Bissell sweeper. And there are all kinds of Bissell sweepers that are hanging on the wall, and you could buy one of those. And the Bissell Company still's in business. You can still buy these non-electric Bissell sweepers, and they still work really well. I've got one that I use all the time. But one of the most amazing things about this exhibit is this mannequin. It's not a mannequin. That is a robot that we wound up, and then dirt would be placed down by the Bissell sweeping unit, and it would actually work as a robot and sweep up the dirt. They had robots in 1904, mechanical robots. And here's another company that was an exhibit, the Savage Rifle Company. You could buy rifles at the World's Fair in 1904, and they had a target shooting range on the fairgrounds. One reason 1,200 acres were necessary. But you could buy a rifle from the Savage Rifle Company and then take it out and try it out. Now, Mr. Savage, that was his name, Savage. He named his company after himself. But again, another racist thing about the fair, he always would have a Native American mannequin dressed up. And this is not just a mannequin, it is a robot as well, because what would happen when you approached it, it would every once in a while lift up the rifle and pull the trigger, and you'd hear a bang. It had caps in it. It was a robot that worked in this exhibit. And this is an amazing exhibit of hardware. I'm going to zoom in on this one. The Kindt Cutter Company had all these things moving. The knives you see there, it was opening and closing. The shears over on the left, 7 foot long that was opening and closing. And the fountain you see was moving. Those are chains, and it would be moving. And the inside that little theater area, there was a chainmail, not a chainmail, but a chain link waterfalls coming down. All this was moving around and just making all kinds of noise too as you stood there. And then modern bathroom equipment. Oh my goodness. You'd come in there and see this, and you'd want to buy some of this for your bathroom if you could get plumbing. This was an amazing shower. It had about 16 shower heads in it, so it squirted at you from all kinds of directions. Now, you weren't allowed to try it out, but you could see how it would be an effective way to get clean very quickly. And then, of course, there was the Victor Talking Machine Company. And Edison, here's an example of Bill Murray, who sang that Meet Me in St. Louis song. His voice was recorded on one of those wax cylinders, and that's one of them right there. And you could purchase it from this particular booth, and you could hear it played also on their equipment. And there's that famous Victor dog listening to his master's voice. And then the typewriters, modern typewriters. Wow, these are things people had never tried before. Most people, they were, coming out in offices, and you could try one out. The Underwood Typewriter Company was there. And if I was able to come and do this presentation in in person, like I had hoped to do back in April, I would have brought with me my Underwood typewriter that was at the World's Fair and let you try it out. Notice how elaborate the booth is. That stained glass dome on top of it and all kinds of tiles. And there are the typewriters you could try out. And some more over here. And stained glass in their name in stained glass. And then the Oliver Typewriter Company, they had their typewriters there too, all kinds of typewriter companies. And the Kahn Music Company had their musical instruments on display. You could try them out. You could actually blow a horn and see if you wanted to buy a saxophone. And there are some of their instruments on display. Notice the organ on the right. That was a working organ, and they'd have concerts there every so many hours, and you could sit there and listen and then try out the organ as well. And the Chinese had amazingly decorated, inlaid, carved furniture and ceramics. Again, all of this for sale. And the famous Funkin' Wagnall was available. Some of you, if you're my age, would have known that you had a Funkin' Wagnall encyclopedia in your house. You got it from the grocery store, volume by volume. And then there was a famous thing that was said when I went to school. If I didn't know the answer, my teacher would say, go home and look it up in your Funkin' Wagnalls. So here you could have bought a Funkin' Wagnall dictionary or encyclopedia. Telescopes were on display, and you could try one out. Look up at the stars at night. And for sale. The largest photograph in the whole world was on display in 1904, 72 feet long by the Wehrle brothers. You can see it up above that display. I straightened it out a little bit so you could see it up above here. There it is, of the Swiss Alps. And what they did is they had these immense cameras that would take these wide angle pictures as well as concatenate the negatives together to make the prints. So they could print these on huge pieces of paper that were in rollers. Now here's an example of a very badly damaged negative. I wanted to show that to you for that purpose, to see some of the things we've lost when the water got on them. But another reason is that the photographer who took this thought he was taking a picture of Festival Hall and the lagoon in front of it, and that's what the picture was all about. But what he didn't realize was something else was happening at the moment he clicked his shutter. We'll zoom in on it and see it. A gondola started to sink, and men were trying to rescue it at the moment he took the picture. Now, a parade of floats. I mentioned that the films were made by the Edison and the Motoscope Company. I'm going to play a little video here. I hope this plays through for you online. So here is the best quality video, and actually it was a film that was made, and this was called a parade of floats. Each nation had a boat, and they would put their people on there, representatives, and they would then go along and have bands on these floats and in the lagoon, and people would gather along the edges, banks, and listen to the music and see all the people that were playing their various instruments from their countries. And one of my favorites are the bagpipers here in this particular float. So not sure how that worked over Zoom, but we'll find out later, I guess. But you can see that off of my website. I've got that up there for you to look at. Here's Festival Hall with that big organ. I want to talk a little bit about that organ. The first night that they opened it up, they said to the organist, "Open it up, play it really loud. We're opening all the windows, and we're going to see if people can hear it all around the fairgrounds." Unfortunately, he opened it up really loud, and those big pipes shook the roof, and the ceiling was made of plaster of Paris, fell down on thousands of people. Nobody was seriously injured, but then they didn't open it up anymore after that. They had to repair the ceiling. Here's the largest pipe, 32 feet long, and the 7-year-old pony is shown inside of it before it was put together. Here's the console for that organ. This is a famous French organist who was brought to play it on the opening day they played it at the fairgrounds. And there's a picture of the whole organ inside of the festival hall. Agriculture was the largest building on the fairgrounds. And one of my favorite things that I would have gone to when I went into the Palace of Agriculture, I'm going to zoom in on it, was the puffed rice exhibit. Puffed rice was kind of novel and new to people in 1904. And this was a little cannon that would shoot the rice and puff it up into the little cage you see there. And then you were given a free bag, a little bag of puffed rice to taste. Now, the problem was they didn't remember to put trash cans around in the building. And you can see all the little paper bags that people just threw on the ground. There was no trash. So when they were done with their puffed rice, they threw it down. Watermelons inside the Palace of Agriculture. Yes, giant watermelons as well. And you could get a good free slice of one if you went to the Gulch on Wednesday, August 31st of 1904 after 1 p.m. And there was actually coal mines on the fairgrounds. They dug a miniature coal mine. There was coal under Forest Park, and you could go down in the coal mine there. But also, 20 men feast on one Texas watermelon, a 1,185-pound watermelon that was brought to the fair. And Missouri Big Cheese, a cheese that weighed about 2,000 pounds. And it was a problem with the refrigeration, and the refrigeration actually went out in the agriculture building, and the cheese spoiled, and then they had to abandon using the Palace of Agriculture for a couple of days because of the odor. And here is the Postum Food coffee exhibit, not real coffee, but what is interesting is they advertised it as something that would make really red blood for you. A little false advertising, but a gigantic container here for their Postum drink. Jell-O was on display at the World's Fair, and was very popular. Restaurants were all over the fairgrounds, about 400 restaurants. This was a Bohemia restaurant that had a theater in it. So you could come in and watch some theater while you got your meal. And this was the biggest restaurant. It would seat about 1,000 people inside. There wasn't any air conditioning, but they did have giant fans. I animated a couple of them. These were giant fans that would be hovering over you and blowing down on you while you were eating. And they had dozens of these throughout the restaurant itself. But also look up at the ceiling. You can see these tapestries that were painted up there. I'm going to zoom in on one of them so you can see it. And you can see the beauty of it. And yet so far up, you wonder if anyone without binoculars could have seen these. Restaurants inside the palaces as well. Here's one where you could get some ice cream. A solar furnace was at the World's Fair. These were men from South America, I believe Bolivia, that invented this solar furnace and brought it up here. And what they did is they actually would cook a chicken on that solar furnace and give you a piece of roasted chicken. Giant mirror reflecting the sun and focusing it. And lo and behold, cell phone was invented at the 1904 World's Fair. Here's a man that is using one of them. It was a radio operated operation. It was a radio tower on the grounds, and you could get one of these. Someone else could get one, and then you could actually talk to them and listen to them and listen to music being played as well. The Pike was the entertainment section of the World's Fair, and it was about a mile long from Skinker to Bolivar in St. Louis. And all kinds of countries had their exhibits there. And you can meet all kinds of people from all over the world. There was a parade every evening at 6 p.m. except Sundays. The fair was not open on Sundays in 1904. And the transportation to get around was a horse and buggy. The world's largest Ferris wheel, I mentioned, observation wheel it was called, 60 persons in one of its cars, 32 cars, 45-minute ride. Marriages in the cars and on horseback actually took place. Here's a picture of it under construction. Here it is completed. And here's a close-up of some of the cars with up to 60 people in one of the cars. On the Pike, the incubators were there. Why weren't they in the hospital on the fairgrounds? Some of the doctors didn't think they were scientifically proven yet. But some people in St. Louis had premature babies, and they brought them to the fair to try to rescue them. And some of the babies were saved by the incubators that were on display. Reenactments of sea battles took place where men got down inside of boats and fake cannons were fired. You can see how he can duck down in there and you won't see him. But my favorite display on the Pike would have been Bill Key and his spelling horse Jim. Bill was an ex-slave. He was a slave for 60 years. And he, after he was set free, he started his own veterinarian business, and he was a horse whisperer. And he found this one little horse that was a little bit crippled, but very smart. And he trained this horse to be able to spell. And you may doubt that this is the truth, but I'm going to prove it to you as we go along. So this is Bill and his horse, Jim. This was the pavilion, the only African-American allowed to have a pavilion on the fairgrounds in 1904. This is what it looked like, the educated horse. So one of the things I want to say about the town of Shelby, Tennessee, and the horse is buried there. Jim is buried there with a monument, as is Bill. And he was an amazing trainer. This horse was adopted by the Humane Society, and Bill took it around to public schools. It participated in spelling bees with children, and performed all kinds of other tricks as well. And doubting that it really could spell phonetically, this is the rack that it used, Harvard professors came and they gave their names to the horse, and it was able to spell their first names out. It also spelled out the name of McKinley and Roosevelt's daughter came to the fair and watched as the horse spelled out her name as well. Well, I'm going to go back to this one just for a moment. There's a book about this horse by Mim Eichler Riva called Beautiful Jim Key. And you want to read about this horse to find out the truth about it. It's an amazing story. And Bill made, well, this horse was worth $100,000 in 1904. And he made all kinds of money and was able to live very well with his intelligence and his capabilities. The Temple of Mirth was on the Pike. This was a pass to get into it. And this is a picture of the Temple of Mirth. All kinds of funny things were done to you when you went into the Temple of Mirth. For example, you were told to sit down at a chair and look in a mirror, and you would laugh. When you sat on the chair had springs for legs, and it would collapse on you. A big joke. I don't think they get away with that today in our modern day temples of mirth. And then we will dance the Hoochie Coochie. Remember that song? Well, this is one of the Hoochie Coochie dancers on the Pike, and I'm going to try to play this video to see if it works for you. She's going to dance the Hoochie Coochie. Well, I hope there was a dentist available for her. I wouldn't try the Hoochie Coochie at home. That was actually filmed by the Edison Company on the Pike in St. Louis, Missouri in 1904. Now, here are some other people on the Pike, and what they are doing is demonstrating that they are donkey barbers. Donkey barbers still exist in Egypt, especially, and they do carve special carvings into the hair of the donkeys. And they would demonstrate this on the fairgrounds. Asia on the Pike. Here's another video. And this one without sound. You can see you could get a ride from the camels. You could get a ride on an elephant. There were all kinds of bands from different countries that were marching along, playing. So a very noisy, lots of fun type of place to observe the cultures from around the world on the Pike, an entertainment area. Also, you could get some tea from the tea vendors. You'll notice that I've got some contemporary pictures using very much the same kind of containers. And this is in over in Egypt. You can go in Cairo and you can find these gentlemen walking around and serving tea. The one thing they do is they have disposable cups now. Back then, they only had one cup, and so you'd be drinking out of a cup a lot of people drank out of. Not a good idea for a pandemic era. The other thing to notice is the unusual cigar. Not sure how that worked. This was a magician on the Pike. You might have met him along the way. And as you can see, he's got an egg balanced on his nose and a little chicken in his hand. And that's because the trick was this. You would come up to him and you'd see that egg balancing on his nose, and you'd get in real close and watch it, and it would actually start to hatch right on his nose. And he would then pull the chicken off of his nose and show it to you. Not sure how that worked, but it's reportedly a true fact. And this is another place on the Pike, the Palais du Costume, the ladies' East Room, and all kinds of wonderful garments were on display and modeled there on the Pike. You can see the parasol that was being used to keep shade. All the men basically have the same kind of hats, but the women's hats are all different. And if you can read that, it says 3 American Beauties. There were 3 women who were triplets that would go around the country back in 1904 and appear in all kinds of nice costumes. And they were identical triplets. Jerusalem, the city of Jerusalem was rebuilt in St. Louis, the old city, built in St. Louis, and 1,000 people from Jerusalem, Arabs, Jews, and Christians, were brought and lived in the old city of Jerusalem in Forest Park here in St. Louis in the fair. I zoom in on it. That's kind of a diagram of what it looked like. Now I've got some photographs to show you of it. Here we see the dome of the mosque and the wall around the city and some of the other buildings. There it is inside. And these people that live there would actually make things like they made back in Jerusalem. And you could buy products from them. You could eat in a restaurant. If they had a restaurant back in Jerusalem, you could eat there. You could ride a donkey through the streets of the old city of Jerusalem. And there's a picture of it taken from up high. And this might have been a Jesse Tarbux Beal picture. I'm not sure about that. And then you could go up in the wireless telegraph tower, the one that that panorama was taken from if you wanted. This was a ticket to get up in the top of it. And one of the amazing things about the World's Fair is the weddings that took place on the fairgrounds. One of the things that couples like to do is go up in the top of that tower and be married up high like that. And I mentioned before, couples were married on the Ferris wheel, on horseback. Some of them from Kentucky brought their horses. And I wonder why couples wanted to be married way up high like that. And the thought came to me, maybe it was because they thought that the closer they made their vows to heaven, the longer their marriages would last. I don't know. And now we come to the end of the presentation. This is the World's Fair in St. Louis, lit up at night by Edison. Lights would change colors from white to yellow to blue to red, and I think green as well. So they change colors every so often. I'm zooming in on Festival Hall, where that giant organ was played, and you could hear it in Philadelphia if you go there to the Macy's department store and hear it again. Now we come to the end of the presentation. The last night on December the 1st of 1904, they had a big fireworks display, the biggest one I think ever held in the world, a gigantic fireworks display to celebrate the closing then of the World's Fair. And now on this last slide, I have a little video I'm going to play, and you who are watching are going to sing the song the Meet Me in St. Louis song. So I hope that you'll hear the music. And then while you're there at home, if you're with your family or you're by yourself, that's probably the best thing to do when you're singing if you're like me. But you're going to sing the Meet Me in St. Louis song as the fireworks go off, just like was sung at the World's Fair in 1904. So here we go. Fair. Okay, I'm done. Now, if we have some time for some questions, I'll take them.
All right. Thanks, Karl. That was fantastic. Yeah, we've got some. You kind of answered most of these along the way, but so how were the structures constructed? Were the materials all window dressing, or were they mostly made to just be, not last forever, essentially? That was one of the questions that we had.
Right. Well, the timber that was brought into the World's Fair grounds by railroad cars and then by wagons was cut up in pieces that were just huge, uh, sort of like 2x4s and things like this. And all the buildings, except for the art museum, were made out of these giant wood structures, and then they were covered with this plaster of Paris. It was called staff. It was a mixture of plaster of Paris and horsehair and hemp. It was all kind of, so it was stronger than plaster of Paris. But that plaster of Paris was then molded, and New Jersey actually did a lot of the molding, and it was brought out by train from New Jersey. But we had some molding places here in St. Louis that did it too. So the giant pillars and all that were all put together. And then the statues were all made out of this stuff as well. And so it was all just wooden structures with a plaster of Paris surface. And when December came in St. Louis, we started to get freezing temperatures. The plaster of Paris started to crack. It would freeze and crack and then start falling apart. So they really had to tear all that down. It wasn't a permanent kind of a situation. But the art museum was made out of limestone and granite, and it's still here in St. Louis, and you can still visit it.
Oh, great. Where did the money come from to finance the exposition?
Well, first of all, you could buy a share in the World's Fair. They sold shares, and then if the fair made profits, you got some money, and it was the only World's Fair in history that made money. And so people did get money that had a share, but that was not the primary way. The federal government funded it with millions and millions of dollars, and then Missouri kicked in a lot of money, and then of course the states that built their own buildings, like New York State that built their building here, and all the other states, they paid for their own buildings on the fairgrounds. And then you had some wealthy donors that contributed a lot of money toward it as well. And then then money was made at the, there was an entrance fee. So you paid 50 cents to get in for one day, to get into the fair. And, 50 cents, I think my wife told me the number is, 25 times whatever it is. So that would be about what, $14, $15 or $12. I'm not good at math here, but $12 to get into the fair every day. And you could buy a longer pass, but there, you had, 19 million some people come to the fair and pay that, that fee. So there was a lot of money brought in that way as well.
Oh, great. Yeah. Do you know the name of any artists that created the sculptures? I know you mentioned a couple. Were there any, I guess, artists that were more prominent than others in the sculpting, or was it just many, many different ones? Or
well, now I with my wife was sitting here. She does these presentations with me. She knows all the names of all the sculptors, and
oh wow,
and they're not. But I'll tell you what, I will. Since this question was asked on the website that I sent you, I'll put a list of all the sculptors that did the sculptures at the World's Fair.
Oh, great!
And everybody that's listening can have that website, and you can go there, and they'll be. I'll try to get it on tonight. Actually, it'll be there tonight on that website. So
fantastic. And then this is kind of going back to the buildings, and this is the last question. Were non-staff buildings built for specific purposes to last? Similarly, I guess, to the other question, were the staff buildings, are there any that are permanent, I guess? Someone was asking.
Yeah, all the state buildings that were built on the fairgrounds were made mostly of staff, but there were a few of them, like the Utah State Building was made more out of, it was wooden structure, but it had, and it was actually moved off the fairgrounds, and it is a house, somebody lives in it here in St. Louis. So there were a few buildings like that, the state buildings, that were then taken apart and either moved back by rail car back to their own states, and put back together again like Humpty Dumpty's, but actually, the only building that in the fairgrounds was the art museum, and then built permanently, and then of course the bird cage too. That's on the fairgrounds too. That one.
Well, great. That was great, Karl. Thanks so much for the very detailed. That was really, really detailed photos.
Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah, I wish we could do this again sometime, and maybe after the pandemic's over, I get out and visit back home. I grew up in North Tonawanda and spent a lot of time in Buffalo at the museum there, and at your art museum, and just look forward to coming back home and meeting some of the folks back there again.
Well, I know we'd love to have you back for a live presentation too. So, well, good night, everyone. And like I said, we will have a link to this online as well. So if you know somebody who wants to see it, well, it'll be available probably sometime next week. So
okay.
All right. Thanks.
Sounds good.
Have a good night.
Bye-bye.